So how could we go from annealed to quenched critical threshold? No idea?
Isn't it like obvious?
Sorry?
Isn't it obvious?
It's
like
not obvious.
It's like that Anelli's theorem or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Fubini-Tonelli, yeah. It's not trivial, so maybe one coffee break is not enough, and you'll think over till the next tutorial, and that will be one of your job in the next tutorial. Jean-François, that's a very good trick. You should use it. Okay. So exercise for you. Exercise for you. What would happen in the case of what if I had changed the rule for phase percolation and declared what if two faces which share one vertex are declared adjacent in the cluster, being part of the same cluster? The what? No, faces work again, but the only trick is not to explore the same. So, okay, even if I have white faces here, these are declared. So I call that phase prime percolation, because actually that's the dual of phase percolation. If you don't have percolation for the black cluster, that means there is a white cluster in the phase prime, which percolates. And then just I give you the idea of the algorithm. Don't copy if you want to try and find for yourself. It works the same. If your explored guy looks like you have a black boundary, connected black boundary, which is part of the same cluster. So these are black guys. Okay, black faces. Let me write them like this. Black faces. All the rest are adjacent to white. The edge that you will peel, instead of peeling this one, that was in the former peeling process, you will peel that one. You will peel that one. Why? Well, because if you discover a face which is black, actually this one is part of the cluster because you can go through this vertex. So it's the same peeling process, but with a shift towards the edge which is adjacent on the left of the black cluster. Okay? So try to develop the same thing and compute what is the PC face prime, and give me a guess. Maybe the beer has some effect on you after the burger. No, 1/4. 1 minus PC face. Yes, and 1/4 is not 1/2. That's true. Coherent at least. Okay. So you may, if you wish, talk about that during tutorial as well. So let me give you one consequence of that fact, which uses a well-known trick on random walks. Where are my notes? Okay, which are called the off-critical exponents. So maybe you heard about critical exponents in percolation. Do they? They know? What are, okay. So you know what are critical exponents for percolation. You know off-critical exponents as well? Remember maybe you've seen stuff like that in the course. Maybe not like that, but like that. That's theta p. And maybe you've seen that theta p minus pc is like p minus pc if you say so. And that's called an off-critical exponent because you're off criticality and you are asking how does some quantity which goes to 0 behave as you approach criticality. We will study the annealed version of this critical exponent. This is a very deep theorem, so the theorem I'm going to write is not deep. Theorem. Almost the same as this. So what is this? This is the probability that the cluster of the origin is infinite. So I'll do the same, but I average over the maps. So what is the probability over my maps that if I do a phase percolation on the map M with parameter P, which is PC phase plus epsilon, I increase a bit, I put myself at criticality and I increase a bit. That's my percolation. And I ask the probability that my cluster is infinite. It's exactly the analogous of this, but average over the map. Then, in this case, this is asymptotic. Okay, I will not prove asymptotic, so I will say this is comparable to epsilon. Epsilon to the 1. So the off-critical exponent, in this case, is 1. It's comparable to epsilon. Here, it's comparable to epsilon to the 5 over 46. So there, the critical exponent was 5 over 36. That's a quenched one because the lattice is fixed. And here, I'm averaging over all the lattices, and I get this. You understand the meaning of that? Okay, so proof. You should be able to start the proof yourself. What is this probability? With my notation, it's exactly the probability, this, is the probability that the random walk SP stays positive forever. Where this is a random walk with increments of mean. Remember what was the mean? -1 minus gulp plus P exposed, and P is PC plus epsilon. So if you look at this only at epsilon, you get 0. So the mean is just epsilon times the exposure, so 2 epsilon. Okay? So now I ask you the question, I take a random walk such that it's very close to be centered. The mean increment, the mean of the increment is epsilon. What is the probability that this walk actually stays positive forever? So in general, that's not easy. In general, that's not easy, but I will treat the case of particular walks that are of the type close to this random walk, and that will maybe pop up in the course of Jean-François. Les walks qui font que des plus 1. You will speak about that? Maybe. So the question is this. But notice, so important point, it's not an arbitrary walk because delta SNP, so the jumps that the walk can do are bounded from above by 2 in our case. Because the best case is you swallow one guy and you discover 3. So we have a walk which is what we call right continuous, almost right continuous, meaning the positive jumps are small. The negative jumps can be very big. The negative jumps can be very big, but not the positive jumps. So let's focus on a simpler case, focus on random walks, which I call S, with mean increment epsilon, and such that the positive jumps of the walk are always bounded by 1. You can do steps, up steps by 1, down steps you can go as you wish, but you cannot increase by much more than 1. Okay, so there is a wonderful trick which may look like a parachute. No, this is a montgolfière. Parachute is more like that. But it's also a wonderful idea. But it's a bit tricky. So what's the idea? So the question we ask on this walk is exactly this one. What is the probability that this walk stays positive forever? So let's look at a simpler question. What is the probability that the walk S, so started from 0, say, to simplify things, what is the probability that this guy is, maybe I will mess up things, we'll see, is positive for all k between 0 and n. If we let n go to infinity, then clearly this probability goes to the thing we want. Okay? So let's focus on this. That's not the trick. The trick is coming here. So let's look at a sample of that walk. I'm not in a good shape today. Okay, so that walk starts here at 0, can make up step by 1, maybe down step by 2, maybe up by 1, up by 1, up by 1, down by 1, up by 1, down by 2, up by 1, by 1, by 1, by 1, by 2, 1, 1. Remember, it has a positive drift. Small but positive, so it will eventually kind of drift. Okay, let's say that's sufficient. On that sample of S, the walk has not this property. It has not stayed positive. So the trick now is to consider what I will denote by S tilde, the walk S with a random starting point. What do I mean by that? This walk S up to time n can be seen as increments. Here I see a +1, minus 3, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, etc. Okay? These increments go from 0 to n, but I could very well see this increment in a cyclic version, meaning plus 1 here, here I've got plus 1, and then up, I start again here. So what I will do is I will choose a random starting point, meaning a point between 0 and n minus 1. And I will start the walk at this point. Say I have sampled this one. That's my random starting point. So I will accumulate the increments of the walk cyclically starting from that point. So the walk starts here, my new coordinates are here, and the new walk does exactly the same here but shifted version. And when we arrive here, we start again here. Okay, let's maybe do 1 or 2 minus 3. 1, 2, 3, ta, 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 tak, tak, tak. And that's it. Okay? That's my new walk. Oh, I was very unlucky today. That walk again has not the property that I wanted. Okay? But what you can say is that this walk S tilde has the same law as the walk S. That's pretty clear, right? I just take the increments that I see cyclically and I decide to sum up these increments, but from a random starting point. So clearly, the walk S tilde has the same law as the walk S. Here, I'm restricted on the final version. But now, you may ask, a posteriori, what are the points there from which, if I had started the walk S tilde, I would have had this property. So let's try to see on this picture, what are these points? So again, I want to start the walk S tilde from such a red point, not this one, it does not work, but tell me from which point I could start so that S tilde stays positive, except for the very first point. If I start from here, does that work? No, because here, when I'm coming back here, I see a 0. So this one does not work. This one does not work as well. Not this one, not this one, not this one. Oh, this one, that's the minimum of the walk. Does that work? Yeah, that works. Because if I start the walk here, and I climb up here, and then I have just this and this, okay, I stay positive. Is it the only one? So this one, does it work? No. Not this one.
The other minimum is okay.
Sorry?
The other minimum is okay.
This one? Yeah, this one is also okay. Imagine you start your coordinate system here, you see the walk, pop, 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 up to here, tac, 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 up, it stays positive. Yeah, this one works. Do you see another one?
Next to me.
This one? No, this one does not work because of that one. So no, no, no. Ah, but this one works as well. But that one as well. Maybe I should not get excited too much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that one again. And then I should stop. Let's check with this one. Okay, positive, positive, positive. I should stop here, right? No. No, but that's the most dangerous point for this one, and I'm still positive. Okay, that works as well. But let's check that with this one it should not work. Okay, check it. How many of such points do I have? Does it work? Actually, I'm confused. Maybe, okay.
You can go up 2, but you can't.
Yeah. You see better than me. Does it work with this one?
No, it
No.
doesn't.
Okay. So now let's do a computation. What is the value of the walk here? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of such points, good starting point, I had? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Coincidence?
Magic.
Sorry?
Magic.
Magic? Or very well prepared lecture? No, actually it works always. So the number of good starting points, I leave it as a very easy exercise, very easy. I mean, it's a combinatorial exercise, not that difficult. So general fact, the number of good starting points for which the walk S tilde is positive after time 1. This is always equal to the value of the walk Sn, provided it's positive, of course, provided it's positive. Okay, that's, if you wish, there is no probability there. I give you such a path. How many such points do I have? Always the value of the walk there. Okay, but now we can use our parachute trick and say, okay, what is the probability that S, my walk S, stays positive for any k between 1 and n? Or I could say that's the probability that S tilde k stays positive because they have the same law. But now I can say, let's first condition on the increments Sn. So that's the conditional expectation of S tilde k positive for all 1 k to n, given the walk S k 0 k n. And then there, that's just the probability that the random starting point of S tilde has been picked among the good starting points. So this is just Sk over n, provided that Sk is non-negative. Okay, now you can develop the expectation. It's just expectation of Sn. But now, what do we know on the random walk S? We know it has a small drift epsilon. So when n is very, very large, what is the typical value of Sn? It's roughly epsilon n. Or in other words, Sn divided by n goes to epsilon. And you are okay, you should take care of the left tail, but the right tail is, I mean, Sn cannot be bigger than n, but okay, let's say that with a proper dominated convergence theorem, this goes to epsilon as n goes to infinity. So you see that's almost miraculous because I have not used any fine property of the step distribution of S except the fact that the upward jumps were bounded by 1. That's it. That works for all increments as long as these two properties are okay. Epsilon equal. There it's equal to epsilon. This is equal to the mean. So if you take such a distribution, which has a very small drift towards infinity, what is the probability that it stays positive? It's equal to the drift. Magic, as you said.
Excuse me, at what point did we actually use the fact that our positive increments are bounded by 1?
There. Because here, if you could have made a jump of 2, you would have lost this starting point. So it's in this lemma. Very good transition, because in our case, the walk can do up steps by 2. So of these starting points, you may lose a couple, half. And that's why in the statement of the theorem, instead of putting an exact epsilon, I said it's up to constant epsilon. And these constants are half or 2, whatever. Okay? So that's called the cyclic lemma or Kemperman formula, or there are other names, cyclic lemma. Well, the trick is this one, to randomize the starting point and to count the number of good starting points. Okay. So let's go now to the last chapter of this course. So we have understood properties of random walk on planar maps, properties of percolation on random planar maps, but the goal, the primary goal, was to understand the metric, the geometry of these maps. So let's finally attack this goal. Geometry of the UIPQ. So for this chapter, we work under the measure that I denoted P1 infinity. Let me remind you what this measure is about. So M under this probability measure is a random infinite planar map such that the face adjacent on the right of the root edge has degree 2, and all the other faces are quadrangles. So on and so forth, and it fill the plane in the sense that this map is infinite and has one end. You remember? As usual, we will see, I guess I told you about this trick. We can squeeze the root face of degree 2 into one edge by saying, okay, let me squeeze that into this, so that it's a proper quadrangulation of the plane in our terminology. Okay? And what is the goal? So the primary goal is to understand what is the geometry of this. You remember what it is? That's the ball of radius r in the map. So let's say we want to understand the volume of this guy, say the number of vertices. Actually, I will cheat a little bit, twice. Because I will not actually deal with the what? The metric on the quadrangulation, but I will rather deal with the metric on the dual map. So I have my dual map here. This dual map is a tetravalent map. Every vertex has degree 4, because it's the dual of faces which have degree 4. And so I will rather study M-dual, the dual map, in this metric. Still, this is too complicated for me. So I will cheat one more step. And this one may seem very strange at first glance. I will actually add randomness on the map. Meaning that, okay, what is the dual graph distance? Dual graph distance. If I take two faces, this one and this one, it's the minimal length of a blue path going from that blue point to that one. That's the graph distance on the dual. So I will trick this distance by considering first passage percolation on the dual map. What is that? Have they seen first passage percolation? You know what is first. You know percolation. Maybe passage is not clear to you. So what I will do is under a probability measure that I denote PM FPP, I will sample weights x of E for all edges of the dual map. The weights xe are IID, exponential variables, so the density is just e to the minus y dy for positive y, and carried by the edges of M dagger. So instead of saying in the graph distance, basically in the graph distance I consider that every edge has length 1 because traversing an edge costs 1. Here I will give new weights to all these blue edges. I don't know, this one has a weight 0.3, this one has a weight which is 7.2, it's very costly, this one 1.2, this one pi, okay? And I will then trick the graph distance by putting the first passage percolation distance on the dual between two faces F1 and F2. So these are two faces, this is F1, this is F2, say. This will be the infimum of the sum of the weights along paths, where the infimum is taken over all paths going from the face F1 to F2. Exactly the same as in graph distance. In the graph distance, you take the shortest path the minimal length of a path going from F1 to F2. Here, you just change the length of a path. Instead of being its length, it's the sum of the weights along the path. Okay? So, the belief, now I'll try to justify these approximations for you. The belief, which is actually true in some cases, proved in some cases, true always, but proved in some cases. The belief is that at large scales, the graph distance is equal to constant times the graph distance on the dual and equal to the graph distance, the FPP distance on the dual. So up to a multiplicative constant, they should look the same. So looking at the ball of radius r for large r for this distance is the same as looking at the ball of radius r divided by c2 in this distance. Okay? C2r. Yes. Another piece of notation. Actually, it will be very convenient when dealing with this blue graph not to see it as a graph with points and edges carrying weights, but actually it will be very convenient to see all of these edges as real segments of length, which is given by the weight. Okay? So we will see M dagger as collections of real segments 0 xe glued according to the combinatoric of the map, to the combinatorics of the map. You understand what I mean? I mean that if this has length 0.3, then I will really imagine that here I have a real segment of length 0.3, and here I have a real segment of length 7.2. Okay? So actually these, they can be seen as metric spaces. And to be precise, they are length space. What are length spaces? If you take two guys at distance, say 2 from each other, then there is a geodesic going from one to the other, and this geodesic is isomorphic to a real segment of length 2. Okay, maybe I should not enter the details of this. Yes? Yes, but I've never seen that I'm drawing this with length 0.3. I see this as a metric space. Just if you wish, the state space is the union of these guys. Bless you! The state space is the union of these guys, and the metric is the metric you imagine. You glue the endpoints, and in between when you are inside a segment, then you use the metric of the segment, and then you take the infimum of the path. Does that make sense? It will be maybe a bit clearer when I introduce the ball of radius t. So with this interpretation, for t positive, introduce the ball of radius t FPP m. What is the ball of radius t FPP m? Let's look in one example. Okay. That's my root edge. That's my origin in the map, in the dual map. I see stuff like that. You know. So what do I mean by ball of radius t? Imagine that I put water here, water or whatever, any fluid, and I wait time t, and I imagine that this water diffuses at speed 1 along each edge of the map. So if this edge has length 7, and if this one, say, has length 1, this one 8, this one 4, this one 3, 2, and this one, I don't know, 5. Let's assume I put water in it. This one has length 8. And I wait for time 5. Where can the water go? Here it can go up to maybe here. 5/7 of this edge. Here it can cross this up to that point, and here maybe up to that point here. Here up to here. Then that's 3, that's for 3. Then you've got 2 more. Maybe this is 1, and this is 4, and this is 4 and 7. So if 3, you've got 1 more, maybe a bit of this. 5, I said, huh? So maybe 5. 5 minus 2 is 3. 3. Because when you are at this point, you still have time 3 to go. But this edge is of length 8. So if the water can go from both sides, but it cannot reach the middle of this guy, because you would need time 4 and a bit of this maybe. Okay?
Also, the edge to the left, like length 4.
3, you still have time 2. Up to 3, 1, you still have time 1. Yes. Very good. So that's the definition of ball of radius t. Actually, that's not the definition I will use. Let's put a tilde. Now I will need a combinatorial version of this ball. And I will say that the ball of radius t, FPP, is made of those edges in ball T FPP M tilde, which are completely explored, entirely. What's this color? Yellow. Thank you. I'm colorblind, you know, so okay. Which are entirely explored. So in this figure, this would correspond to this edge, this one, this one, this one, and that one. That's it. The other ones, which are partially explored, are not part of the combinatorial ball of radius t. Okay? Actually, I've cheated a little bit. Welcome back. Should I start from the... Actually, I'm cheating a little bit because I will not use this definition, but with my notation, this is actually the dual subset of the submap ball of radius T FPP M will actually be a submap of M. And there, I'm only describing for you the set of dual edges to this submap. Okay? So if you wish, what is the submap in this case? Then this guy is just made of the root face here, another quadrangle here for this one. Here you've got another quadrangle for which you know that is identified. You have another quadrangle here, and that's it. No, another one here. Just to be sure, let me put yes. That's it. Am I correct? Where? This one? Glued there? No, because we don't, this edge is not part of that dual subset of edges, so I don't know yet if they are glued. I only take in this dual subset the edges that are totally explored. And this one has not been totally explored because of this blue part. Okay? Okay, so now, as usual, if M is one-ended, I denote by the ball of radius T FPP bar of M, the filled-in version of ball of radius T FPP M. What does that mean? This is a submap of M. Since M is one-ended, there is only one hole of this submap which contains an infinite part. Then I fill in all the other holes with their proper submaps, finite submaps in M. Okay? We've seen that 10 times. Okay. Now this process, the process ball filled TFPP of M as a process of T as jump times, because when T evolves, this process stays the same until something happens and this process changes. As jump times that I denote T0 is equal to 0, T1, T2, Tn, and so on and so forth. And then the key proposition is the following. Proposition. M is fixed. The randomness part of the map is not there. Then under the measure that I defined, this PMFPP, so the randomness on these exponential edges, the process ball TI FPP of M has the law of a uniform peeling of M. What do I mean by uniform peeling of M? I mean where the next edge, filled-in peeling. It's a filled-in version of the peeling, of course, because I've taken only the hull of the balls, where the next edge to peel is chosen uniformly at random on the boundary, independently of the past. Furthermore, conditionally on this exploration, conditionally on this, okay. I'm a bit loose in the notation, I will explain, but let's see if you understand first. Conditionally on this, the variables ti plus 1 minus ti, which I denote by delta ti, are independent and of flow an exponential variable of parameter. This is it's not the exposure, let's put a E like that. Of parameter, the perimeter of ball Ti FPP M. Ooh la 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 la. I let you copy this proposition and then I explain. So what does that mean? That means that if M is fixed, and you want to sample this process, the process of the growing balls for the FPP distance, the completed balls, the health of the balls, then there is a way to get this process without speaking about exponential variables, which is the following. You start with your root face, as usual, and then uniformly, you pick an edge on the boundary uniformly at random. You give me some random variables, say this one, and then you peel this edge. Maybe you discover this. Then you peel again an edge uniformly at random on the boundary. Say you discover something like that. That's a quadrangle. Then you peel an edge uniformly on the boundary, say this one, and you see that these two are identified, and this is a finite hole, and then you fill in, so on. Okay? That gives you the law, this uniform peeling process gives you the law of this growing sequence of submaps. Okay? Second step of the proof, conditionally on this growing sequence of submaps, the increase of the times Ti are just given by independent exponential variables of parameter, which is the perimeter of the map at time n. Again, in this case, this was step 3 maybe. Then you will have a delta T3, which is just an exponential variable of parameter, the boundary length. Here it's 3. Maybe you trigger this peeling step. And so at next stage, the increase of the time Ti will be an exponential of parameter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? How do we prove this? First, let me recall a few very easy and well-known facts about exponential variables. So, facts. First, the exponential variable of parameter alpha has density. The parameter is the inverse of the mean. So, it's e to the minus alpha x, and you, this, when alpha is alpha, that's the parameter, and so the mean, as mean, 1 over alpha. That's first fact. That's definition if you wish. Second fact is if x is an exponential variable of parameter alpha, then the law of x minus t conditioned on x being larger than t is, again, exponential parameter alpha. That's the memory what? Memoryless property of exponential random variables. Still half an hour to go. I should have taken a coffee. For you too, huh? And third fact, if you take xi, xk independent exponential variables of parameter alpha I, then the minimum of x1, xk as the law of an exponential variable of the sum of the perimeters, and the argmin how can we write that? Argmin, what is this function? Well, okay, the one that minimizes the index of the variable that minimizes is independent of this guy and distributed proportionally to the parameter. Okay, you need to renormalize. You all know these properties, right? They know. Hard to follow. So let us condition on the exploration up to time ti. So what do you know? You know everything you need to know for the exploration up to time ti. So you know that you've got some submap. That's the submap ball ti m FPP. And you also know all the length of the edges which are inside. So if you have a face here, so in my notation, if you have a face here, and the root, I don't know, the root is somewhere here, you know what is the time it took for the water to reach this face. Okay? So let's examine the situation conditionally on this. There are edges on the boundary of this explored map, and they are of two types. You've got edges which link faces to new face in the map, but you also have edges which connect 1, 2, 3, 4. But you also have edges which connect two faces which are adjacent to the boundary, meaning that if you were to peel this edge, you would identify these two edges. Okay? What do you know on the weights of these edges? So let's first examine that type. So we've got some face here, denote F1. What we know is that the FPP distance between the root face FR and F1 what do I know? I know that it's less than T1. Because at time Ti, I have discovered this phase, so I have a path of dual edges which have been totally explored by time Ti. But remember in my drawing with the yellow edges, it could be that at time Ti, actually a bit of the water goes up to a bit along this edge, but not up to the end, because otherwise I would have fully discovered this edge. So that means that the weight, what is the weight of this edge? Let's call it E. The weight of this edge E is larger than Ti minus this, the FPP distance between the root face and F1. Because otherwise I would have fully explored this guy. And by the property of exponential variables, I'm just conditioning this guy on this event. Then the remaining time here is independent of what I have here and has low exponential of parameter 1. And the rest, let me do a graphical proof. The rest, which I denote by this purple guy, is distributed as an exponential of parameter 1. Fair enough. Let's now examine an edge of the second type. For an edge of the second type, we have almost the same thing, so let's denote this edge by E. Let's put F1 and F2 for these two faces. So what do we know? Again, the water flowing from the root face must have reached this face. And the water must have reached this face as well. The water may have explored a bit of this edge and of this one from the other side. But the water cannot have reached the middle point or discovered the full edge, otherwise the edge would have been already explored. Okay? So that means that the weight of this guy, of edges of the second type, say, edges of second type, I must have xe, the weight, must be bigger than Ti minus the time it takes to go to phase 1. What is this quantity? This quantity is just this length, the yellow length, this yellow here. But I also have the exploration from the other side, this other yellow length. Because this edge of the second type is explored from both ends. You understand? So what do you deduce? Again, the purple guy, which is the remaining part that has not been explored, and the purple guy, so the purple guy is xe minus this, is distributed as an exponential of parameter 1. All right? So all these and all the purple guys are independent. So the situation after having explored this guy is that I have some edges which have a part of purple to be explored, and I have edges of the second type which are explored from both ends, and the purple part that has not been explored is, again, distributed as an exponential variable of parameter 1. They are all independent and all distributed according to this. Now, what is happening for the next edge, which will be entirely visited? So either it's an edge of type 1, meaning that one of these purple regions here is the minimal one, and you get to explore this edge after time, which is this length. But there are also the edges of the second type, which are getting explored from both ends. So these exponential variables, as time goes by, they shrink at speed 2. So now you imagine that this is a picture freezed at time ti, and you let time evolve, and you see this purple region. The purple region associated to edges of type 1, they shrink at speed 1, and the purple region associated to edges of type 2, they shrink at speed 2. Okay? So ti plus 1 minus ti is equal in distribution to the minimum of exponential variables of type 1 for type 1 edges and exponential variable of parameter 1, but divided by 2 because they are eaten from both sides for type 2 edges. I mean, these are independent copies, and how many of these? This is the number. The number is the number of type 1 edges. So now you use this property there. What is the law of the minimum of some variables? Oh, yes, I should have told you. Exponential of parameter 1 divided by 2 has the law of an exponential of parameter 2. Okay, now you take the minimal of all these guys, and that's equal in law to an exponential of parameter, the number of type 1 edge, plus 2 times the number of type 2 edges. But this is nothing but the perimeter of the map. Because each edge on the perimeter gets either a type 1 edge or a type 2, but counted twice. Just the perimeter. Okay? And okay, so that's the property here. That the increase of the ti is distributed as an exponential variable of the parameter, which is the perimeter. And I need to tell you why it's a uniform peeling, why the edge to ring, the next purple region to be closed, is uniform on the boundary. So there you may say, oh, but there is a bias because the edges which are of type 2 are getting eaten from both sides. So this edge here, this purple region, has a probability which is bigger to be the first that is swallowed by the process compared to this one. But this edge also corresponds to 2 peeling steps. If you trigger a peeling step from that side or from that side, you will end up discovering the same map. You understand what I mean? So instead of putting an exponential variable of parameter 2 here, you could put an exponential variable of parameter 1 on each side and take the minimal of the 2. So everything boils down to assigning exponential variable of parameter 1 on each edge on the boundary of your map and take the minimum of it. And the first one that rings, you take it, and that's the increment. Sleep over that. You'll see it's simple once you try to do it yourself. Okay, now I've got 15 minutes to make an application of this. Okay, let's erase that. You can wake up now, because it's the thing that I promised on the very first day. So, theorem. Now we will randomize the map. Oh, okay. Uniform peeling. Is it a legal peeling?
It's not an algorithm, but
Well, you could, as usual, put all the randomness of the uniform edge to choose on the boundary in a backside random variable, which, for example, is a sequence of IID uniform variables over 0, 1. And once you're at the nth peeling step, you take your uniform variable over 0, 1 to select an edge uniformly on the boundary. So once again, this uniform peeling is a randomized algorithm. So we will be able to apply our theorems. So under P1 infinity dm P Fm FPP for the weights xe, we have with the notation EI is the ball of radius Ti for the FPP distance En. We have the boundary. Remember, that's the half boundary. With my notation, that's the half boundary of the unique hole of this exploration process. Remember, last week, we renormalized this by nt in time and n to the 2/3 in space. We also spoke about the volume briefly, but let me not be very precise here. I just explained you that we need to renormalize the volume, the number of vertices inside, by n to the 4/3. And there we've got a third set of random variable which we can study, which is the time, nt. And there we need to renormalize by n to the 1/3. Then this converges in distribution as n goes to infinity. The first two variables we treated last week. This one converges towards what I denoted by L3½ T, the spectrally negative Levy process condition to stay positive. Let's not talk about this process, volume process. Let's put in parentheses. And this one will converge towards 1/2 of the integral of this guy. Ugly. But from this, you get something which has a geometric meaning. So let's see if I manage to do it. Yes?
Are those like independent?
No. It's the triple. This guy is the same as this one. Yes. It's joint convergence in distribution for the Skorokhod topology. Okay, but let me derive a consequence of this. Consequence of this is do I want to be precise? Okay, let's not be precise. What is this? Remember that this is, or it's written there. The guy you've got explored is a ball for some metric. Okay? The metric is the FPP distance on the dual. But what this theorem tells you is that when the radius of your ball, that's the radius, Ti is actually a radius in this distance. When the radius is of order n to the 1/3, then the perimeter of your hole is n to the 2/3, and the perimeter and the volume is n to the 4/3. That means that, roughly speaking, after time Ti which is n to the 1/3, you have explored a map. So that's a two-dimensional representation of the map that you've got explored. It's a cactus, where the unique hole that you are currently peeling on has size n to the 2/3, and the volume is n to the 4/3. So if you make the change of variable, this is the radius, you find what I promised, meaning that balls of radius roughly r have volume r to the 4 and have perimeters here r squared. And from this theorem, you may also actually get a functional limit law for the volumes as r varies. But let me not enter these details. Okay, so you clearly see here that the radius as a function of peeling steps increase like n to the 1/3, whereas the perimeter increase like n to the 2/3, and the volume n to the 4/3. So the volume is the radius to the 4. Okay? Okay. Let's see how to prove this. Where does this, okay, this I tried to convince you last week. So let me try to give you a hint how to prove this convergence and this exponent, this n to the 1/3. So we know from last week we know this convergence already. Okay, so what is interesting for us now is to study the convergence of the third guy conditionally on the first two. So focus on Ti conditionally on the perimeters, say. We can even condition on the full sequence. Why? Because from this proposition, we know that if we condition on the combinatorics of the exploration process, then the TIs are just given by summing exponential variables of these parameters. Okay? So if you want to understand what is Tn, then you just need to sum exponential variables of parameter the perimeter of the exploration time I. Actually, with my notation, this is half the perimeter. So I must put a 2 here. Okay? From I, 0 to n minus 1. But this is just an exponential variable of parameter alpha is an exponential variable of parameter 1 multiplied by 1 over alpha. So this, okay, my notations are not good. I should put some I here just to say that they are all independent. But okay, it's not my only mistake, so forgive me at that point. Just 7 minutes to go. So these are independent guys divided by twice the perimeter of EI. And now the heuristic goes as follows. You say, okay, we know that these guys is roughly n to the 2/3. Roughly. So you sum n guys, exponential of parameter 1 is roughly 1. So you sum n guys of order 1 over n to the 2/3. So that's n to the 1/3. Actually, there is a technical point here. Yes, you may. There is a slight point which is dubious. And if I have time, I want to explain this because it's nice. Solving this point uses the cyclic lemma again. Actually, what we can write is if you take nt and you subtract nt epsilon, forgive me about the integer part. This needs to be good. Forgive me at that point. This is, again, forgive me about the boundary conditions. There is maybe plus or minus 1. You can write this for t bigger than epsilon. And there you are in a good shape. Why? Because this process, you know, this one, that it converges towards this guy. L up arrow 3/2. And I told you last week that this process roughly looks like something like this. It has negative jumps. But it is positive. It is positive, meaning that if I put some epsilon and some t here, then I know that the process is not too close to 0. Meaning that I will have a control on these guys. When I say that they are roughly like n to the 2/3, I really mean that they are at least of order n to the 2/3. If I have this control over the time epsilon, if I'm away from 0. Then making this argument precise and showing that this converges once renormalized by n to 1/3, that this converges towards the inverse of the integral of the inverse, sorry. With a 2, that's not a big deal. That's easy. Easy, why again? Because we've got control on these guys. They are really of order n to the 2/3. The problem is that if you put epsilon equal to 0, these guys may become small. And so you don't have a uniform control on them anymore. So if you want to finish the proof from here, again, this is technical, but not that difficult. If you want to finish the proof, you need to say that this guy actually is small when epsilon is small. You want to let epsilon go to 0. So need to prove that t n epsilon is times n to the minus third is small when epsilon is small. Or if you prefer, we need to show that if you can prove that the expectation of Tn is less than some constant times n to the 1/3, that would do the job. Because if you've got a control of the first moment of Tn, then the probability that Tn is bigger than some big constant and n to the 1/3 is small. Then you get control on this. So I really want to show you how to do that. Okay, now you can wake up. This is a new calculation. If you want to estimate this Tn, then you may say, okay, I know that this guy is the sum of exponential variable of parameter 1 divided by twice the volume of the exploration. Sorry, the perimeter, the half perimeter. Okay, so if I condition on the exploration EI, I get just the sum of 1 over because the expectation of exponential variable of parameter 1 is 1. Ah, okay, so what I need to control is this. I need to control the expectation of 1 over the half perimeter of the peeling process at time I. If I can show that this is less than some constant n to the minus 2/3, that would do the job. So I want to show that. Yes, because if you sum n to the 1/3 from I to the minus 1/3 from I is equal to 0 to n, you go back with this estimate into the third there. So you want to show that. But this is just an estimate on random walk. Because recall all the notations we have introduced. This is the same as the random walk Sn up arrow at time n, the walk condition to stay positive. If you want to control this, then you could say, okay, this is equal to sum from k is equal to 0 up to, say, plus infinity of, well, 1 over k. And now recall what is the definition of the H transform. We add this function H. Okay, maybe everybody's lost. But not me. Still into the calculation, so I finish. Probability that this Si is positive for all I less than n, and Sn is equal to k. That's just the equation we have written for the H transform. You know, if you ask a question on the H transform, what is the probability that this guy is at k at step n, then that's just the ratio of the H function on the allowed path. So you want to estimate this. But this, again, what is it? That's the probability that your random walk stays positive and be at k at time n. It's exactly the calculation we did. You use the cyclic lemma. Yes, it's k over n times the probability that the standard simple random walk there, not simple, the random walk there, at time n is equal to k. So you get rid of this conditioning by the cyclic lemma, and then there are a few more lines here. You need to use some estimates on the random walk, the local limit theorems, so on. But I wanted to show you that this cyclic lemma pops up into the proof again. I stop here. Thank you. Questions? What is going to be at the exam? That's a good question. I don't know. Yes.
What is the SN up there? Sorry. What is the SN there?
Sn is the random walk with increment mu. You remember the nu, which is the limit of this spinning mu? You don't remember nu?
No. What is the up arrow mean?
Why is it with upper row?
That's the walk S condition to stay positive. You know it's the H up arrow transform of S. We dealt with that last week.
Okay. Because I wasn't here last week.
Okay, so, sorry. I can explain to you, but it's also in the lecture notes. I will send you maybe next week, unless I go faster than speed of light, but a version of the lecture notes which covers most of what I have discussed here. Okay.